going to want to do is double check to make sure that my pistol is clear and safe. So obviously I'm going to handle it with my finger off the trigger, muzzle point in safe direction. Visually and physically make sure it is clear and safe before I begin. At this point, folks, I'm going to go ahead and disassemble the pistol. Now, there's a lot of different manufacturers out there, a lot of different handguns, and what you're going to need to do is disassemble your pistol in accordance with your manufacturer's recommendations. We certainly aren't going to go through every manufacturer, every make and model out here. What I'm basically going to do is run you through general care and cleaning and maintenance of a modern semi-automatic pistol. But the first thing you're going to have to do is take it apart. So we'll get right into that. So again, after it's clear and safe, you go through whatever disassembly procedures are proper for the pistol that you have. So I'll go through the ones with this particular make and model right here. And what I'm going to do is field strip the pistol. Field strip, what that means basically is I'm going to disassemble my pistol without the use of any tools down to the largest components. So I've got my frame on the lower part, and you've got your recoil spring and guide, and then you have your barrel. And that's as far as I'm going to take apart this pistol right here. Since I'm going to clean the magazine as well, I'm going to want to take that apart. I'll save that for last. So at this point, I've got my pistol field stripped. Like I said, I've got my frame, I've got my recoil spring and guide, and in some cases these will separate. This one is one captured system. And then I've got my barrel and I've got my slide. I usually start with the component that's typically going to be the dirtiest. And typically the dirtiest component is going to be the barrel. So I'll typically start by cleaning the barrel. So in this case, I'm simply just going to use my bore brush with a brass tip on the end of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a little bit of my CLP, my cleaner, lubricant, and protectant to my bristle brush. So I'm going to start from the rear of my barrel and work forward. Folks, that's going to be important. You always want to go from the rear of your barrel forward, and you want to go all the way down and all the way out and pull it all the way back through. The reason we do it from the back instead of the front is we want to avoid damaging the crown or the muzzle, because that could affect accuracy if you ding it up. So it's always good practice to go from the front and all the way down and all the way back. Something you'll do if you do it, if you go halfway down and try to change directions, those bristles are going to get locked up and you're going to have a heck of a time getting that thing back out. So I'll do that several times, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, whatever it takes, depending on how dirty it is, and make sure it gets cleaned up really good. Specifically for the chamber end, what I'll do is I'll push it down in just the chamber portion, and I'll give it several twists back and forth to clean up the chamber area real good, and then I'll finish it up with a couple more passes all the way down and all the way out. At that point, what I'll do, since I'm still going to get it a little bit messy, is I'll take my dry bristle brush and I'll clean off the back of the chamber area really good. This is a part of the pistol that's going to get fairly dirty. So I'm going to want to clean this up and polish it up real good. A nylon brush works really good, or in some cases you may have to use a stainless steel or brass brush depending on how much gunk you got in there. Sometime, maybe a tip of a knife or a little dental tool, something like that, works good to get in the nooks and crannies. But for general cleaning, care, and maintenance, a brush like this will work really good to clean it up and get it all cleaned up good. At that point, what I want to do is I want to run a couple patches down the bore to make sure that I've got all the gunk out. So what I'm going to do is put on my eyelet, and I'm going to put a couple patches in the end of that eyelet, and all I'll do is I'll run a couple patches down the bore until they start to come out clean. And you can run those back and forth a couple times, and I'll take that off, and I'll do that several times. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to look up through the barrel at the light and get to a point where it's nice and shiny, it's clean, I'm not seeing any debris in there, and then I've got my barrel all cleaned up. So that's pretty straightforward. As far as my recoil spring and guide's concerned, this really doesn't get that dirty, but it's worth giving it a little bit of a brush down, and I'll typically take a rag and wipe the rest of it down. I'll also do that with the barrel. So after it's cleaned up, I'll wipe down the external part of my barrel, polish everything up, make sure I've got everything cleaned up really good. So that's the barrel and the guide. Next, I'll typically go for my slide. Now, underneath the slide, you've got your breech face. Now, the breech face is the area where the firing pin or the striker actually is going to protrude. That area usually gets pretty dirty. I typically just use a dry nylon bristle brush, and I'll clean up the breech face really good and scrub it up. And you have your extractor. Your extractor is a piece which extracts your round out of the chamber. up underneath that hook or the extractor that's right in here has a tendency to get dirty. So I'll take the little small part of my bristle brush here and scrub up underneath that real good. So you want to clean up your breech face real good, and then I'll typically finish off by polishing it up with my finger on my rag a little bit. And then inside where your chamber area would be inside your slide tends to get a little bit dirty in there. So again, I'll take my dry brush and I'll just scrub up underneath it, down the rails and the grooves to make sure everything's cleaned up really good. And then again, simply just wrap the rag around my finger and polish it up real good and get in all the little nooks and crannies. At that point, it's pretty much done deal and it's all cleaned up and ready to go. All right, so I've got the slide all cleaned up. Now I'm going to go to my frame. Now my frame, not a whole lot to do in here, but basically going to give it a good wipe down. Oftentimes you have a feed ramp that's up here. Sometimes there's a feed ramp, or actually both. There's a feed ramp on your barrel, and sometimes there's a feed ramp in your frame as well. You're going to want to make sure that's cleaned up good. I like to use a dry brush, and I'll basically scrub up everything good. You have your rails and your grooves that made up with your slide. I'll go ahead and give those a good scrub down. Then I'll also get the brush up in my magazine well and clean that up good. After I've done it all with a dry brush, what I'll do is take a rag and I'll just wipe down everything and polish everything up really good. Magazine well tends to get dirty, so basically wrap your rag around your finger and get up in there, and that works out pretty good. So at this point, I've got my frame all cleaned up and it's all set.